Hey there, Jim Johnson for Accent Help, and I had somebody asking about diacritics that I tend to use that are really helpful to use with accents, and so you're going to get my opinion on that. So I talked another time about suprasegmentals, which are a part of the chart that tend to comment more on the larger scale. They're down sort of on this right lower part of the full IPA chart. What I want to do now is talk a little bit more about the diacritics that are on the lower left part of the chart in general. And so these diacritics, there are a few of them that I want to kind of get out of the way because these are diacritics that you're going to use whether you're really digging into accents or not. So I want to make sure that I hit these. So one of them is rhoticity. So on the chart, it looks a little bit fancier than what I will write. It's got this sort of a line. I'm trying to do it exactly as it's written. That little thing where it's a straight line there, and it's in the bottom left of this version of the chart. And then it does a little curve there. Well, I tend to do a faster version of it where it's just like that because there's not much of anything to be confused with it. And that's rhoticity. That is the essence of R-ness. So if something is rhotic, it is R-ish. And this rhoticity is something you will commonly use, and the convention is that most people just add them to these two symbols. This would be the as in letter, the unstressed, and this would be the as in nurse. Or you could think of this as murder, further, or perturbed, if you use the word perturbed. I was rather perturbed about people who don't use that word. But that's a symbol that you'll use commonly there. Now, theoretically, you could say that the word like start is almost start. You could maybe put the rhoticity there, but it's not what people tend to do. It's not the convention. And so I think it's useful to be aware of what the conventions are with how it tends to be used. But in theory, you could put that tweak. Certainly on any vowels, I hesitate to use that on, say that it's really usable on a consonant, but certainly usable on a vowel. Some other ones that I want to talk about is with the suprasegmentals, I talked a little bit about length, that you can have something that's a longer sound or a shorter sound. There's something that's kind of related to that, and that's a little line underneath. And this is not to be confused with another thing I talked about with the suprasegmentals, which is primary stress and secondary stress. Well, this line will appear, say, directly, most of the time, directly under an L or directly under an N. But it could appear under anything else that is sustainable, because that's if it's sustainable, you can sort of treat it like a vowel. So this diacritic means syllabic. This is syllabic, like this L, even though there's not a vowel in this syllable, say in the word middle, that would be a syllabic L potentially. And in the word ridden, I'd ridden a horse, depending on how you pronounce it, that could be a syllabic N. You could also have a syllabic M, like in prism. You might just do a syllabic M there and not do a vowel leading into it. So that's syllabic. This tends to get used with some other symbols, which is a little D leading into that one and a little L leading into that one. Let me separate these for a moment. This would be something like didn't, that you might do a, whoops, I'm putting a D there, that's an N. You're doing a little nasal release, didn't. So that little N is a diacritic for nasal release. I'm letting that D release through my nose instead of through my mouth, which a lot of people, when they say this word, didn't, they do it through the mouth. Didn't, as opposed to didn't, through the nose. If you struggle with that, say the phrase, did know, I did know, I did know, didn't, and that'll get you to pop it through your nose if you continue to work on that. But then the moment you attach it to the word didn't, you might start saying didn't, shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't. Or you could choose to go didn't, shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't. That's that nasal release. So that's a diacritic that I use all the time to explain that sort of phenomenon. And the little L thing is very, very similar, where I'm going to put a little syllable break there. And I could do something like the word middle. So you arrive at that D, and then instead of going through the middle and putting a vowel on there, middle, I will tend to go middle, and I'll sort of flop the sound around the side of my tongue. So that's lateral release, releasing it around the sides. So that's another one that I use a lot. That's just like common use, and it's less about specific accents and dialects. And then two more that I want to hit on that are also mostly about common usage are, for example, I could take a T sound and I could talk about whether it's got no audible release, this little corner on it, or whether it has aspiration. So you might say quote, or you might say quote, and put a corner on it. Now the reality, when you say quote, you're not just saying a T, you are simultaneously saying a glottal stop. You're stopping it here as your tongue goes up here to stop that. So these are happening simultaneously. If you watched the one on suprasegmentals, I mentioned this for ch and j, the affricates. So these may happen simultaneously, and they're stopped, they're cornered like that. You could also make a distinction between a T without an H and a T with an H, and that could be the difference, for example, between top and stop. We don't tend to aspirate the T on stop as much as we aspirate the T on top. It's because that S transitioning into it kind of shifts it a little bit. So these are the different diacritics. These, along with the syllabic and the nasal release and the lateral release, those are some diacritics that I use a lot just to commonly express the way that people speak. There's another diacritic that's not even on the list, but some people like J.C. Wells uses it, and I really like it. So I wish it were on the list. And it's a little tiny schwa, and it's kind of the equivalent of this. And it would be if you had something voiced at the end of something, you could have a little tiny schwa that says did, where it's almost this off glide, where you're doing this shadow vowel, did. That's how it's often spoken about, like for opera singers. It's a shadow vowel. Oftentimes for projecting for a huge space, you need to add a shadow vowel at the end of something. Like nasal consonants are really problematic. If it's a word that's hard to understand, if you say down, people might go down. What is he saying? Down. And a little shadow vowel on that N, especially in a big space, can be helpful. So that's a diacritic that doesn't sort of exist, but I've seen J.C. Wells, who's a big-time linguist, I've seen him use it, so I'm going to use it too. Unfortunately, I can't find it so much to type it, but I think it is a legitimate, made-up diacritic. So those are sort of an intro to the diacritics that I use really commonly before we would dive into diacritics that I think are really appropriate for explaining accent variations. For more info on accents in general, and you'll see me use more phonetics in the materials that I've created, for accenthelp.com. Thanks.